Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. John Karasek, Robert E. Redding, National Capital Area Alumni Chapter, International Board Member at Large. Today, we're honored to have joining us a very distinguished speaker. Wendell Taylor of the Redding Chapter is the managing partner of Hunton Andrews Kurth's DC office, the firm's largest office of about 200 attorneys. Wendell went to Wake Forest University for undergraduate and the University of Richmond for law school. In law school, Wendell was the president of his class, voted by his classmates to be graduation speaker, and voted by the faculty to receive the Outstanding Graduate Award. Wendell recorded his SoundCloud Our Pain first as a Zoom talk to his office, but the talk has since gone viral. Our Pain is Wendell's attempt to foster empathy by telling his personal experiences with law enforcement. Today, Wendell will talk more about the stories from Our Pain and will provide tips on ways to advance the goal of racial equality in America. Wendell Taylor, everyone.
Thank you, Brother John. Appreciate everyone joining. So we're here today to talk about one of my favorite topics, me. But in all seriousness, this topic, this session is about Our Pain. It's a podcast I did after the George Floyd recording was released. It really haunted me to see someone slowly murdered, and the lack of empathy that was portrayed by the officers really stood out. You know, it was a man pleading for his life and seemingly resigned to the fact that he was going to die, and in pleading, to tell his mother that he loved her. It was shocking to me that, none of the officers showed any empathy for the plight he was going through. And then almost as a bookend to the lack of empathy that the officers exhibited was the overwhelming empathy that basically everyone else had for the moment when they were watching the tape. And so, I had the question, how could it have such an impact on everybody else, but not have much of an impact on the officers at the scene? So at best, I thought the officers, allowed themselves to some sort of perverse groupthink that, overrode their basic human decency. But for the rest of us, it provided this wave of emotional empathy that has really changed lives and has started to change the country. And the tape, provided a firsthand evidence of, in a very gut-wrenching nature, that we have a major problem in this country. There was no tape with Breonna Taylor when she was murdered. Some say Eric Garner's size played a part in, his death, or that he was resisting. Tamir Rice, the tape was grainy and short, and there was no sound. It was far away. Michael Brown, some say he wasn't a nice guy, or that he fought back against the police. Philando Castile, well, maybe he wasn't properly following the instructions of the officers. Sandra Bland, yeah, maybe she really did, hang herself in jail. There were excuses for each one of these things. But with George Floyd, it was different. It was irrefutable. And this human side that we saw that, had been abstract for most people for a long time, because you can't help but feel empathy for, a man that's being slowly murdered by callous officers, literally draining the life from his body while bystanders, pleaded for his life. So that's when I had the idea that I should talk about my negative experiences with law enforcement, to try to, double down on the empathy, so to speak, that I think has been, welled up in our country. So at first I had to, really tell a good story. And I've had, tons of life experiences that, allowed me to do that. So check. It also had to be, heartfelt. It had to be personal. I had to, like I said, well up emotions that I buried for a long time. And, I had to let myself feel the emotions that I wanted to convey and wanted everyone else to feel. And, I've said this before, some of the emotions I felt while giving the talk were not even, me reliving things that had gone on in my past. It was, the pain, our pain. That's why I titled it Our Pain. If you think about it, that's the very definition of empathy. It's feeling what others feel. And so I intended not just to feel what I was going through at the time, but to also, feel what those I just named and many more have felt when they were going through their encounters, oftentimes deadly, with law enforcement. So it also helped that I was telling these stories all together. because, they spanned, over about 15 years of my life. So I didn't experience them all at once, but reliving them all together added an extra layer. And, finally, like I've stated, it was talk to my office. And, it started out as a Zoom call that I'd done, during the pandemic to help bring us all together and stay connected. And, first it was just updating on office closures and whatever Dr. Fauci had to say. I started calling it my Thursday morning musings. But then the George Floyd, tape surfaced, and I thought I had to say something. And I wanted to say something to the office to stay connected. By the time that week rolled around, it was pretty inevitable that I had to talk about my experiences, and it would have been a missed opportunity to not do so. So, I really thought, though, that, telling it over Zoom, I would have a difficult time relating to the office not being in person, but it actually created a more powerful effect. When you're in a conference room listening to a talk, you try to hold it together because people are around you. When you're at home by yourself, you're not thinking anybody's watching. When you're listening to someone speak, you kind of let yourself go. And I saw this in real time. I saw, over 150 people on the call. Some were motioning their family members over to listen. Many others were weeping. Older Black ladies, I saw a couple of them just get up and leave. They couldn't take it. So it really helped to well up the emotions in me. And at the end, as you could probably tell from listening, I was emotionally spent. But I had the foresight to record it. And for those in my office who couldn't listen. And so that afternoon, I sent it around to the office. And within a couple of hours, my old boss, Jim Comey, reached out to me, who's not at my firm. And he said he'd heard it. I asked him how, and he said he laughed and said he has spies all around, which clearly he does. By the next day, there were calls to release it publicly. That's when I created the SoundCloud that many of you have heard. So for those who haven't heard it, it's Our Pain. It's linked in the description of the talk I'm giving now. But if you Google Wendell Taylor and Our Pain, it should pop up if you haven't. And like I have mentioned, I used the George Floyd incident to springboard to dive into my negative experiences with law enforcement. From an incident when I was a 10-year-old boy accused of stealing at a convenience store to being wrongly arrested in college for being in a bar fight for a bar I'd never even gone into, and erroneous ID of a witness who claimed, she saw me there. And then finally to a bona fide incident of police brutality when I was in law school as the president of student bar, working during the summer for the Richmond prosecutor's office, where I was writing an opposition to a motion to suppress evidence defending Richmond police officer stop of a different black at a bus station. And I was stopped in, eerily similar circumstances. Anyway, I first told that story at the PAD Leadership Summit last summer when the topic was, how my adversities have led to me being an effective leader. So today I plan to just go into a deeper dive into my SoundCloud, the stories from Our Pain, and to provide more context in kind of a longer format. And if you have any questions, you can please chat them. I may not be able to get to them, but I think John will help moderate if need be. And so, I've just kind of gone through Our Pain, and I'm just going to add some context. So I've kind of set up what took place. And in the first part, I just wanted to implore everyone to feel empathy for me and for George Floyd and to the plight of many blacks in our country. So let's go straight to the convenience store incident. As a kid, I was 11 years old. I was walking home from school. I stopped at a convenience store, which I did most days, left my book bag outside the store, and then in the store was accused of stealing, was detained by the clerk, and the clerk called a police officer, and I was searched. And I mentioned in the story, I put a little tidbit in that my son Tate turns 11 this August. This story really resonated with a lot of people, mostly moms. I've gotten a lot of calls and emails from moms who said, they were just, mortified at hearing the story. to think about, their kids in that situation. Especially a boy like myself that was, trying to be respectful, trying to be disarming, knowing to leave my book bag outside, and knowing that, I could be accused of a crime and detained by a store clerk really horrified me. My family, of course, was also pissed off. We ended up, suing the convenience store. And during the litigation, I met with the therapist. And I remember this meeting vividly. I clearly already knew that I was Black in America, obviously. And I knew that wasn't necessarily a positive thing. It's the reason I left the book bag outside the store in the first place. And again, this was very heartbreaking for a lot of listeners, that even at age 11, I knew that I should leave it outside lest I be, labeled as a criminal. But before I met with the therapist, I didn't have language to describe how I felt. One of my favorite books, I have it here on the table, 1984, one of the main themes is, how words are powerful and the act to kind of crystallize thoughts. And that's what happened to me. I mean, I remember the therapist giving me language that I never really had to describe what was going on. The idea that I've been discriminated against began to crystallize. And it's difficult for a child, but, it was my reality, again, our reality, our pain. I talk a lot about my daughter, Ava. She's 13. She and I are kindred spirits. Before the PAD talk last summer, I told her I was giving a talk on leadership, and she advised me and cautioned me against giving leadership advice that the folks who were listening could then use to try to take my job. So she begged me to not give up-to-date leadership advice right before that talk. Anyway, 2 years ago, Ava was 11, and the same age I was when I faced the stark reality of being Black in America and being viewed as a criminal, no matter what, I did to try to change that perception. I remember talking to her about the term Black Lives Matter 2 years ago. And we're talking about just mattering, right? What a low bar that is. That was my point of view, mattering. The comedian Michael Che has a really great bit about it. If you hadn't seen it, you should check it out. Anyway, 11-year-old Ava had a real problem with the term Black Lives Matter. Over the course of several conversations, she came around to what she thought was a more appropriate slogan, a more inclusive slogan: all brown lives matter also. And so certainly not as catchy, but that's as far as she was willing to go at the time. So fast forward, 2 years later, to right around the time when the George Floyd tape was released, Ava and I revisited the conversation, and she was embarrassed by her earlier views about Black Lives Matter. And she was even upset with me for letting her say all brown lives matter also out loud. And, in those 2 years, she developed kind of a different perspective, and she's now totally on board with the term Black Lives Matter. We laughed about it. Again, she was embarrassed, but she was able to articulate her issue. I thought it was because she didn't think the term was inclusive enough, that she thought it was exclusive. But it was not that she was reading into the term that Black Lives Matter more or only Black Lives Matter. She said it was self-hate that caused her to reject the slogan. So I asked her to explain that, and she said she wasn't ready to face the reality that Black people needed to matter. So yeah, let that one sit with you for a second. She wasn't ready that we needed to matter, or just to beg the country that we needed to matter. It was too painful to think about segregation or slavery or police brutality, and to have a movement started around just mattering. So to me, that is the spirit behind the term white privilege. It's not that all white people have it easier than all Black people, or white people have more resources. It's that being Black adds an extra layer. It's that you're slapped in the face as an 11-year-old with the burden of having to just matter. Walking around suspected for something you didn't do, being judged on the basis of your race is a heavy burden. It's a privilege to walk out of a store without a bag, so to speak. I interviewed Justice John Charles Thomas. He's the first African-American lawyer at a large firm in the South to start a firm and make partner at that firm. And he did so at Hunton Andrews Kurth, my firm. He started at Hunton in 1975 and made partner in 1982. This is in my lifetime, first Black person to make partner at a major law firm in the South. He told me in the interview that he never walks out of a store without a bag. And I immediately knew what he meant. Insisting on getting a bag legitimizes your purchase. Because if you carry an item outside the store without a bag, you might be viewed as a criminal. So I don't have the privilege to walk out of a store without a bag, lest someone think I stole something. So any one of these things like that might not be an enormous weight, but adding them together, they create an anchor weighing down your ability to navigate America's waters. You know, there's also male privilege. I have really close female friends, and it is a universal truth that women are accosted in public by men at an appalling rate. Men think it's harmless, but it's really not. It's not harmless because it makes women feel uncomfortable. It makes them fear for their safety. It makes them change their behavior. I don't have that burden. I have the privilege of walking down the street, and except for a very rare exception, you know, I don't get hit on. But that's a burden I don't face. There are other burdens that women face in corporate America that I don't have to deal with. But it all comes back to empathy. Put yourself in others' shoes. Allow yourself to think about how afraid you might be if a group of men followed you down the road just to look at you or catcall you. And hopefully empathy will change behaviors. All right, second story, the college incident where I was accused of being in a bar fight that I wasn't in. I don't have much to add here about that story other than I really dodged a major bullet. It was my freshman year of college. I was on a football scholarship. And I was really worried that this incident could jeopardize my status on the team, or perhaps I would actually lose my scholarship. You know, fortunately, my coach believed that I was wrongly accused, and there were no immediate repercussions. In fact, at the time, the arrest gave me somewhat of some notoriety on campus, so to speak. You know, as I mentioned in the SoundCloud, I had to explain all this to the Virginia Board of Bar Examiners before I took the bar, and that was a pain. Studying for the bar obviously is nerve-wracking enough without having to deal with explaining away an arrest in the middle of it. But the issue there was that I didn't mention on my character and fitness exam that I'd been arrested. I was under the impression that it would not appear on my record and I didn't have to mention it. The question was something along the lines of, have you ever been a party to a criminal proceeding? And, you know, I didn't think I had been. Obviously, the Virginia Board of Bar Examiners disagreed, but it got all worked out. But this incident also had kind of a masking effect for me. I've always viewed myself as a nerd in jock's clothing. And so being arrested in a bar fight for being in a bar fight is just about the most jockey thing that could ever happen to anyone. And so it kind of added that extra layer of my experience in college. But, you know, research shows that blacks and whites commit crimes around the same rates, but blacks are stopped by police way more often. So logic dictates then that more arrests will result from that. Think of Philando Castile, you know, who was pulled over 30 times before he was killed by law enforcement. Sooner or later, something negative is going to happen. So really, the first two stories were just primers for the third one, when there are times in your life when reality really smacks you in the face. And the third incident was one of those times. I'd been elected, you know, student bar president by my classmates. I'd impressed my trial advocacy professor so much that it landed me a summer internship at a prosecutor's office. And I was trying actual cases as a law student. And the irony was thick of me working on an opposition to a motion to suppress evidence found after a different police officer had stopped a different black guy. I mentioned a story last summer at the PAD Leadership Summit. And it was the first time I'd really told this story out loud, except in close circles. So why hadn't I told it much? I realized it was the same reason why Ava doesn't or didn't want to. I wanted to soften the blow of the black experience and the coping mechanism. So I chose to ignore it. I've often done something different. I try to use game theory when I'm in a situation. I play speed chess to unwind. I'm a pretty good chess player. I'm not great. About a 1700 level chess player, hopelessly stuck at just about pretty good. But although my chess game really hasn't gotten any better, chess has really helped my day-to-day life. And so I try to think about how I can maximize my expected payoff in a given situation. So with a police officer who's itching to do me harm by baiting me, by pushing me against a wall, keep my hands up, backing up, not resisting, hopefully getting arrested and fighting a system was, to me, my best way out. I was able to dissociate, or at least to remove myself from the emotion of the situation, to detach. It allowed me to be rational and to figure out that fighting back in the moment might have, deadly consequences. Because detaching is easier when you're not shocked by a given situation. Detaching is easier when you've been through it before, which I had been. I use an example of getting the wind knocked out of you as a way to describe one of my parenting philosophies that is analogous to this situation. In playing high school football, I remember this happening a couple times. A kid would, come out for the team having never played football before. He'd fall on the ball and he'd get the wind knocked out of him. And now, if you grew up playing football, if you're growing up and you play sports, you probably had this happen to you several times. And when it happened then, you might, and if it happened again in football practice in high school, you might think you're dying, but you can tell yourself, okay, I know I'm not really dying. Like, I just got the wind knocked out of me. But when you're in high school and this happens to you for the first time, you really believe you're dying, and you might not come out for the football team the next day. And that happened. I saw folks quit over things like that. If it happens too late in life, it'll change you. And so I try to be the opposite of a helicopter parent. And really, the reality hit me and Ava around the same age. And having the wind knocked out of me with racism over and over prepared me for the law school encounter. If I'd never experienced something like that before, maybe I'd reacted differently, maybe more aggressively. And like I said in our pain, maybe I wouldn't be here to tell you about it. So having been there allowed me to, speak aloud, to be detached about it, and to think about the situation, logically, to think like a speed chess player would, to use, game theory to guide my moves. And logically, my move at that point was to try to de-escalate the situation. I speak to groups of kids at basketball camps in the summer. A lot of them are Black kids. And I like to hear them out. I know it's unfair that they're oftentimes treated like criminals for no fault of their own. It's unfair that they get followed by police. It's unfair that they get stopped by police at a disproportionate rate. But if a police officer is attempting to arrest you, my position is you should let it happen. You don't give them the justification that they didn't have when the encounter started. And logically, the system wouldn't work at all if the person being arrested got to decide whether they should be arrested. If that were the case, no one would ever be arrested. But the lack of probable cause in those situations goes out of the window when you resist. So I try to think logically and try to employ game theory and think what's the best way out. I think that's what I did in the situation that allowed me to de-escalate it and to not have that officer do more harm to me than he already did. So those are just kind of more, deeper thoughts on the three incidents that I went through that I talk about in our pain. At the end of the talk, I talk about, some of the ideas I have to kind of advance the ball. And the first thing is to, resist the urge to turn away. And it's because I want everybody to feel the empathy, to kind of, put us more closely aligned on the same team. We have to make it our pain. I actually remember being in college in a racial relations class, and the professor asked, the question, how to end racism in America. And I responded, alien invasion. My classmates laughed. I was being somewhat facetious, but only partly. I think we really need a common enemy, a rallying cry to bring us all together, feeling the pain that others felt like I asked for. And for a brief time when I played football, that was my reality. In high school, everyone I played with was Black, and everyone was from the same socioeconomic class. In college, it was way different. We had white guys on the team. We had guys that were from, privileged backgrounds, and politically, their views were all over the place, from far left to far right. But none of that matters in the dead heat of August when your coach is yelling at you. None of it matters when you're playing against a common enemy every Saturday. You see bonds formed. You see people who you never grew up with, or people that never grew up with anyone of any different races or socioeconomic classes, folks that came to the table with very preconceived notions about others. You see them all coming together for a common cause. You see inner city Black guys and rural white guys spending Thanksgiving together. And being on the same team is powerful, because it doesn't matter if you're playing a team made up of people from your same demographic, socioeconomic class, political ideology. They're on a different team, and you'll go to war for your teammates. And if they win, you win, and that's what we need. Second, I talk about fanning the flames in the fight against injustice. And I think the Gen Zers are doing us a great service here. They are relentless, and they won't take no for an answer. And I'm happy to see a lot of them on the front lines. Third, I talk about challenging divisive views in your circles. I love the term anti-racist. It really does capture the difference between simply being on the sidelines as someone who's not racist and being in the game fighting against racism. Words matter, like I mentioned with George Orwell. I think too long we've been afraid of using the words. And so I'm really glad to see that that's changing now. And it's heartening to see public statements from companies using the terms like discrimination or police brutality, systematic or systemic racism. It's like we're all sitting, watching and listening to these statements from companies with a bingo card in front of us, waiting to make sure that these companies check the boxes of these squares. They don't have to hit every square, but the companies do have to fill up some of the bingo cards and use some of the words. And the ones that don't and are vague, they lose. And I think the ones that win are the ones that really speak honestly about what the terms are. Let's see. The next thing I talk about is how we can't view this as a fight that Black people have that white people are helping with. Like, I believe very strongly that this is all of our fights. It can't just be the other helping us. It's our pain, it's our own fight, and we're in this together. And it's not just semantics. We fight alongside each other in the fight for racial and gender equity and equality. And it means more when you're in a fight together as opposed to someone, helping you in their fight. And then I ask for empathy for everyone, including law enforcement. Being in law enforcement is a really tough job. You're literally putting your life on the line day in, day out. And sometimes you're in settings where the people hate you and despise you. We can't let them off the hook or give them passes, but we should show empathy for how hard of a job they have and the pressures that they're under day in and day out. So I'm truly honored to be on the front lines of helping this country better and to have my voice heard. So thank you all for listening to that. And I am here for as many questions as you have.
If we have questions, just put them into the chat, and I'll relay them along.
There is one obvious question that I could start with. Should I keep going?
Go. Go right ahead.
Okay, well, no one asked this, but I think the obvious question is, okay, cool, I'm all about empathy. What's next? So I'll just dive into what I think is next. Um, I think after empathy is accountability. Accountability is necessary when we view ourselves as being on the same team as opposed to being at odds. Accountability is, I think, a bridge to civility. Because empathy by itself is a charitable act by the person experiencing the feeling. Accountability is different. It's not charity, it's required. They're all teammates, and my teammates are owed and have the right to my full effort to reach a common goal. And you believe me, like there was quick judgment for people in the locker room who were undertaking behavior that hurt our chances of winning. We were accountable to each other and we trusted each other. So, think about how you feel about someone who you've been through adversity with. You're accountable to them, they're accountable to you, you made it through it, and you trust their intentions going forward. Because, again, trust without accountability is simply charity. And I think when you have accountability and trust, it creates a virtuous cycle. You can think about it from a stress level perspective. Cooperative environments are less stressful psychologically and physiologically. So you're working together, you trust each other, you're accountable to each other, and that lowers your threat level both psychologically and physiologically. Obviously, smartphones have helped this accountability a great deal, especially in the context of interactions with law enforcement, both from bystanders and body cams. And when officers cut off their body cams, they're cutting off the accountability for their actions. So on the flip side, accountability really does foster trust in the community. And at its core, I think it leads to the benefit of the doubt, right? This benefit of the doubt is what binds us. I try to give everyone the benefit of the doubt up front. If they impair that trust, I act accordingly. And what does accountability look like in, say, a non-police environment among us citizens, so to speak? Well, think about what a good teammate would do in that environment. A good teammate would try to help the team win. In this case, winning is, racial and gender equality. And here, teammates have to pay attention. You need to know your history, for example. The history of Juneteenth. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed January 1, 1863, officially ending slavery. But it wasn't until 2.5 years later, on June 19th, 1865, that slaves in Texas were freed. And the term Juneteenth was born. Now, if you heard this story at all growing up, it probably came with the qualifier that it was because the news took 2.5 years to get from Washington to Texas. Even in 1863, news traveled way faster than that. In truth, Union troops weren't able to enforce the order until Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered in April of 1865, leading to slavery really ending 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. We should all know this story. You need to explore the lyrics of the Star-Spangled Banner and determine what you feel about the slave reference in the third verse. And think about whether the song should well up the pride in Black people that many whites feel when they hear it, right? Knowing our history demonstrates a desire to work together cooperatively for a common goal and leads to that trust and the virtuous cycle. There are other ways to foster trust as well, obviously. I remember being in law school and a good friend Turner, invited me to play pickup basketball with him and his friends at a court near his family's house. I don't know if he knew everybody who played with us that day, but he knew most of them. They were all white. One of the guys on the other team was especially dirty towards me, lots of cheap shots. I played it cool, used game theory. I certainly protected myself, but I didn't let him get under my skin. I didn't let the terrorists win, so to speak. But not Turner. The guy fouled me one time really, wrongly, and Turner had enough. He got in the guy's face, ready for battle, because Turner had my back, and I trusted him. That's what we have to do. We have to have each other's back.
We have a question from Brother Ed Anderson. Ed, would you care to pose your question?
Thanks, John. Ed Anderson, District 24 Justice. I want to thank Wendell not only for presenting today. I was at the leadership conference. I heard Wendell speak. Wendell's also an alumni delegate from our district, Wendell, and I want to thank you for your service to our district. But I'd like to know what you think lawyers can do in our own hometowns to direct the conversation about racism and police conduct in a positive direction, something that's helpful to everybody.
Do you mean in a workplace or in the community, or both?
Both.
Yeah, so in the workplace, I think, like I've suggested, we have to be comfortable using the terms, and we have to have uncomfortable conversations. I think when you're in the workplace and we have these conversations, you have settings where people are allowed to say things that, maybe are not the most popular views even, that there is a bond that is created internally. And at the end of the day, at least you can know that your colleagues in your office, care and have listened, and are, together moving the ball forward. I think for us, if you look at it from, my perspective and in big law, I think clients have done a great deal to move the ball forward. I think lawyers are truly slow to change, but when faced with no option otherwise, we're very quick to change. Look at how the profession has changed through the pandemic. Working remotely was something that was foreign to a lot of us 4 or 5 months ago, and now we're all seemingly able to do it very seamlessly. We're very quick to change. When our clients say that they want their cases staffed with more minorities and women, firms jump. And these are firms that, a lot of them lean very to the right and don't think there is any good to affirmative action or judging people by race or putting them, giving them an extra benefit because of it. But when a client says, I'm not going to send you any more work unless you staff your cases with minorities and women, and that lawyer's bottom line is affected, they are more than happy to do what those clients want. So I think the legal profession is changing faster than a lot because lawyers really do whatever their clients want them to do. In the community, I try to meet with groups. Like I mentioned, I speak at groups where kids are, and it's not the most well-received message to tell groups of young Black people to let yourself be arrested by police. They look at me like either I'm not down for the cause or something like that. Some of them do. But again, I believe in, there's a chess player I like, Josh Waitzkin. He's the guy that the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer was made about. He talks about a concept of the truth in the position, that there's certain moves at certain times that are just right. And if you make any other move, it's just wrong. Well, in this situation, I think it's just right that, our tactic in those situations should be to not resist and to allow yourself to be arrested. It's uncomfortable saying those things. And Ed, Brother Ed, you in your community may be forced with saying things that aren't popular, but if you speak your truth and your heart, then whatever you say in the community, I think will ultimately be well received.
We have a question from Sarah Eyberg. Sarah?
Hi, Wendell. Thanks for being with us today. And thank you for joining our ranks as a Phi Alpha Delta member. We are very lucky to have you. My question was how we can attract more BIPOC people to our profession, and then how can we support them when they get there? In Minnesota, where I live, we have 26,000 members of our state bar association and licensed attorneys in the state, and less than 800 are Black. And that, to me, feels criminal, frankly, especially considering, Minnesota's a fairly white state, but it's not, proportionally that white. I would like to know how I can help recruit more Black attorneys to our profession so that our clients can see themselves in their representation.
Right. Yeah, and that's part of it is being able to kind of see yourself as a lawyer. During the Great Recession of '09, Black lawyers and minority lawyers in general were disproportionately harmed by the Great Recession. They were laid off at greater rates, and it really caused a ripple effect in law schools where folks thought, why would I join this profession that doesn't support me? I think we have to play the long game here in that, seeing the examples that, you provide, and also seeing people that look like me in leadership positions, they let people know that they can do it. That effect is kind of wearing off for me. It's funny, when I was a young associate, I was much better able to recruit African Americans to my firm than I am now. Because as a first or second year associate, they could see themselves in me. They could see what their life would look like. Well, now I'm the managing partner of an office. They think, there's no way I can ever be that. So we need to keep, we need to make sure that we keep the ranks flowing, because when you have, 2 or 3 years, again, after the Great Recession where, Blacks are hired at lower rates, then it creates this void where the next group that comes along, they don't see themselves in those environments. For me, when I joined Hutton, we had 2 African Americans in our Richmond office. One was Justice John Charles Thomas, who I mentioned, who was the first everything. And the other was a woman named Jim McClellan, who is now running for governor in Virginia. So you literally had to be a superstar even to work at my beloved firm. And I'm hopeful that that's changing. I think with more examples of folks like us in leadership positions, it will change. But I think we do have to play the long game because that doesn't change overnight. But I do think, we need to, as a people, realize that there is a great opportunity. And that's what I felt. I felt like coming to a place that was like 95% white, they needed me more than I needed them.
Our next question is from Lauren Bush, who's here in our DC area. And
yes, hi, Brother Wendell. Thank you so much. I just had a question for you regarding the first incident when you talked about leaving your backpack outside of the store. As a child, my parents gave me kind of rules as a Black kid to keep myself safe. So I was wondering if that was a result of something that your parents had imparted upon you, or that you, from seeing your environment, just made that determination that this is what I should do to keep myself safe in this environment.
Yeah, that's a great question. That was something I came up with on my own. My mom was great, but she was more. She sees the good in every situation. So I didn't have very many uncomfortable conversations with her. She would always say to me, you're the best at this, you're the best at that, and nobody can stand in your way. And that was great. But I had to really face the reality of America on my own, because maybe like with Ava or me, it was too painful for her to realize or to have the conversation. I like to be very frank with my kids because, like I said about the wind knocked out of you, better for it to happen sooner, and better for Tate to know where he lives than to think, he can buck a cop or something and it ends up, deadly. Yeah.
Right. And I just want to thank you for speaking to us and piggybacking on your last comment. I think that, yes, you are very successful in a partner, but telling these stories is relatable to a lot of young people of color, and reminding them, no matter how far we climb, we know and we can understand and relate to a lot of their experiences. So I really appreciate you sharing.
Thank you.
We have a question from Bill Rothman.
Bill Rothman, New York City alumni. Welcome, Brother Wendell. I would just want to say that your video was the most moving video that I had seen, brought me to tears. And I'm sure I can say I'm not the only one who shared your video on Facebook. I think I asked your permission at the time if I could, and I got great responses from people that saw that video. It was just very moving. I come from a family of police officers, and I just want to say that they would be the first to jump on your bandwagon to fight the problems in the police department, New York City Police Department here, where we've had a number of those kinds of incidents, many more than, it's far from acceptable. None of it is acceptable. But the way to handle it, I'm struggling with how to actually effectuate a change in the police department, and especially as lawyers, how do we go about fashioning a remedy that will take these police officers, I would like to call them rogue police officers, off the streets. And I'm just wondering if you have done any research on it or have any insight into what standards of proof they use to bring police officers off the streets, and maybe we can reduce that level to a more acceptable level, like instead of using I don't know what level they use right now, but I'm just using this as an example. Instead of using a beyond a reasonable doubt standard, you go down to a substantial evidence standard, for example, where it's, even if it's only 50-50, that's enough. That's just enough to get them off the street.
Right.
I'll pass it on to you to comment on that.
Yeah, so I haven't done any research on this, but I'll say two things. One, I would hope that police officers would employ the same game theory that I try to use in my life, and that is they should think about what damage they're doing to their own profession by not rooting out the bad apples among them. Think about how you have now movements to defund the police. You have scrutiny. You have people who look at them often, they used to look at the profession as noble, and now a lot of people don't. And so it is in their best interest to make sure that the ones that are not good apples are gone. So I would hope that they would do that. I know some do that, but then you have the examples of, officers that try to stand up when their brothers and sisters in arms are doing bad in the community, and the ones that try to stand up to that are the ones that are ostracized by the other police officers, or fired even. And so I really believe it's top down, and this kind of blue shield that they hide behind, we have to, get behind that shield. And I get it, being on a team, you're always going to look out for your teammates. But like I said, when there were teammates of mine that were hurting us, that were hurting our common cause, the team itself, the team members stood up and stopped them. We didn't need the coach to do that. And I don't see that much in police officers. Again, some do it, but the examples I've seen are the ones that try to stand up, and then they're the ones that are punished for it, for trying to stand up for what's right. So we have to change that narrative completely. And again, if officers realized that allowing this to go on is hurting them, hurting their profession, hurting their ability to do their job, it's creating tension in the community, it's heightening that threat level, right? Like, why would you want to be in an environment where people look at you as a threat or an enemy? You'd rather be in an environment where they look at you as a teammate and give you the benefit of the doubt. So if you're an officer and you give someone a reasonable command, they comply with it. But if that person has had nothing but negative experiences with police officers in the past, they're not going to comply. And so it would seem to behoove them to root out those bad apples. And I'm seeing some of that, and hopefully we'll see a lot more of that in the future.
We have a question from Deborah Ward. Deborah? I think you're unmuted. No?
Yes, I didn't really have a question. I think I had a comment. But I had made a comment about what he was saying about why we cannot attract more people to the profession. That I think the way the profession has been perceived, that we cannot attract more people until we actually live up to what we said we were. service to all people, for the equality, justice, and for all. So I just think, I know just looking at a lot of the undergrads coming in, I think a lot of people don't think, just like our host said, a lot of people do not think that they can succeed in the profession. I don't think we actually encourage our young Black people to actually become a part of the profession. From undergrad from a high school to undergrad, I think it's just like you can't do that kind of thing. So until we encourage them that they can make a difference, because I hear and I believe that we can make a difference, but we can't until everybody believes that the profession is actually there for them. So I guess part of my question and my comment is, how can we keep people from getting lost between undergrad? Because my first year undergrad, I wanted to go to law school. By the time I finished, I ended up changing and doing something totally different for like 20 years, education, and then I came back to it. But how do we get the people who are starting off to believe that they will make a difference if they go in there and do that?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have an answer for that one. Our profession changing rapidly. I grew up as a litigation associate, and my first 2 years probably, I billed most of my hours sitting in a conference room reviewing documents. And so, I would picture a big room with boxes upon boxes, like banker's boxes of documents. We would literally take one memo out of the box or email or whatever it was, probably wasn't email back then, a letter or something, and we'd have a blue sheet. And we code this blue sheet. It had responsive, non-responsive, is it a hot document or not, and did it hit all these issues that are relevant in the case? And you code the blue sheet, you staple the blue sheet to the document you read, you put it back in the box, and then somebody would input the information from your blue sheet into a database. And that became your working database. Well, that took years to go through thousands of boxes of documents. Well, now we have software that can do what it took a team of associates years to do. They can do it in an afternoon. And so 20-30% of the profits on big firm litigation is just gone forever. So you don't need as many people to do the job that a lot did before. There's software now that write briefs, right? You have brief writing software that writes briefs better than we can. And so we have to, I don't know that the world needs more lawyers in the future, unfortunately. And when, someone in college asks me, hey, what do you think I should do? Should I go to law school? Whether they're Black, white, or other, I say you should really think long and hard about it. It's a tough profession. Law school is incredibly difficult. The bar is incredibly difficult. Practicing law is incredibly difficult. And so it really is those that, really want to be lawyers and really have a firm path in front of them that are successful. But I don't have an answer for how we continue to persuade minorities that this is a good profession for them, because for a lot of them, maybe it isn't.
We have a question from Jesse Buluck.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Jesse Buluck, Langston chapter. Thank you, Brother Wendell, for doing this talk and sharing your story with everyone. I wanted to know if you could speak to some of your experiences with encountering racism, discrimination, and microaggressions within the legal profession itself, and the constant mental strain that this can cause or have on Black attorneys.
That's a great question. So I will tell this story. It was, I was probably a second-year associate. I will leave the client out of it. But the head of the litigation team came to me and said that this client wanted me to second chair this major trial that they were about to have. And I'm like, my eyebrows raised. I'm like, this is great. They want me? Like, what did they see in me? I don't even work for this client. Why do they want me to do it? And I started thinking, okay, well, I need to get the files, I need to like read up, like, how do I just go try a case? I'm a second-year associate. And the partner was like, no, it'll be fine. You just have to sit at counsel table. And I'm like, what do you mean, just sit? I thought I was second chair in the trial. It's like, well, yeah, it'll be great experience and you'll get to see the action, but you'll be there on the front line. It'll be great, but you don't really have to learn the case. I'm like, well, how do I try a case without learning the case? Well, you won't be the one really trying it. Like literally you'll just be sitting at counsel table. And I realized it was a discrimination case that this company was going through. And they called our firm and said, basically, give me a black person to sit at counsel table. And so here I am with the head of litigation saying, this is a good opportunity for you. This will help your career here. This client really needs you. We need you to do this. And it was unbelievable pressure. And I said, no. I was like, I'm not doing this. Like if this company can't even find a black person that they have worked with before, that they're just basically looking in a phone book and finding whatever black person they can, I cannot in good conscience represent that client on this matter. And so I just feel like you have to stand up for yourself no matter what, even if it hurts your career. And I've done things, I think, throughout my career that have probably hurt. There was a partner one time that when I actually had a trial for a client that was, paying and wanted me to really try their case, I was gearing up for trial, and it was me and a good friend of mine who was a white guy, short white guy, and me, and I'm 6'2", and we sent out the night before to the office, if anybody, had any cases with this judge or give us any tips, et cetera, we've got a trial tomorrow. And the senior partner wrote an email to the whole office, the odd couple goes to court. And I was like incredibly pissed by this. And, I called my friend, the guy I was trying to case with, I'm like, this is bullshit. Sorry, the kid's on the line. And he said, no, you're tall and charismatic and I'm short and nerd. He's not talking about race. I'm like, how can he not be talking about race? Like, does he not know that I'm black and you're white? Like, does he not see it? He's like, no, it's not that. So I went and talked to the guy. And he's like, no, it wasn't about that at all. It's because you're this, that, and the other, and this guy's not you. And I'm like, do you see me as a black man? He's like, well, yeah, but I wasn't really talking about that. Well, I'm like, but how can you write to the whole office, the odd couple goes to court, and not think about what you're saying? So I have tried to, stand up for myself. I certainly do think, though, if I had to, like, you can never hit a bullseye, right? You can never be pitch perfect when situations happen. Maybe sometimes race is involved and you're not quite sure. And then there are times when you know for sure it is. I try to undershoot a little bit because I think it gives me a little more credibility when I do stand up. But when I do stand up, I go all out and stand up. I know some people might tend to overshoot. And in some situations, that works because I don't think folks see, like you said, the microaggressions that take place day in and day out. And so if you call them out on every little one of them, maybe the weight of those does something too. It's just two different philosophies. I've tried to undershoot, but when it's time to go to battle, I do.
Our next question is from Brother Omari Jackson, also a Reading chapter member.
Yes, good afternoon, Brother Wendell. Thank you very much for sharing your story. It definitely made me think about some of the experiences I've had that have been somewhat similar. I have two questions here. First question is, how were you able to successfully navigate some of those discussions that you had about concerning discrimination, as well as your personal experiences about racism? And the second question is, in this day and age of social media, social distancing, virtual platforms, and podcasts. Do you believe that technology can have a positive impact on being able to have these discussions on racism and discrimination?
Yeah, I'll take the second one first. Thank you, Brother Omari. I certainly do think technology plays a role. And, you know, for example, like my SoundCloud wouldn't have happened at all but for technology and the fact that we have been, you know, socially distant. The lights just went off in my office. Hold on. There we go. And so, yeah, it certainly has played a role, and I think will continue to. And obviously, technology plays a role in accountability, like I mentioned, providing body cams, cell phones that give us, you know, firsthand evidence of what is happening. So I think it will get nothing but better because of technology, both in the messaging and in the evidence that we have of what is taking place in our country. How have I navigated this? You know, it goes back to really game theory for me. It's like, you know, I try to look at a situation and think, okay, even if the rules aren't fair, if I know what the rules are, I'm going to try to win the game. And so the rules aren't necessarily fair, but if you tell me what the rules are ahead of time, then I think I could win that. And so I play this game in my mind that, all right, just let me know what they are and I'll play them. I tell young associates at my firm, that, you know, when I was a young associate, I didn't ask any questions I didn't already know the answer to. And they say, what do you mean you didn't ask questions you know? Well, okay, so for example, you're a first-year associate and you're working on a case and you're stuck on an issue. It could take you in two different directions. Should you research X or should you research Y? Well, do you go to your partner on a case and say, hey, I don't know which way to go. Should I go X or Y? Well, you know what the answer is going to be. The answer is going to be do both, right? So why would you ever go there and ask that question? And I think law firms in particular are they are very predictable environments. And I think that has helped me a lot because it's very clear in a law firm what it takes to succeed. And so I think you could probably come up with, if you sat down and did a list, all the questions that could possibly be asked by a young associate. You could write out all those questions. I could answer all of those questions. So if you know the answers to every question, then you only ask the questions that get you the results you want. And that's how, in a small way, I've been able to navigate what has happened. But Justice John Charles Thomas talks about how he loves math and science because there are empirical answers. And because that really does protect you, right? What I talk about with the truth in the position. If you know 2 + 2 = 4, it doesn't matter whether it's a black guy saying 4 or a white guy saying 4, it's 4. Nobody's going to convince the listener that it's 5 no matter what they look like. The more empirical the answer, I think the better off we are. And I do think that at a big firm, a lot of the answers are empirical because ultimately, no matter what folks bring to the table, we're all trying to do the best thing for our clients. It might be completely selfish in that that's the way to make you the most money, but it does end up being an environment where I believe there are a ton of empirical answers. And if you can distinguish yourself as someone who's a good lawyer and is dedicated, I think it's a place where you can survive. So that's how I've been able to do it in my situation.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Brother Cliff Schechter.
Thank you. Our force of habit tells us to introduce ourselves a little bit. So, Brother Taylor, I wanted to thank you very much for your time here. My day job, when I'm not involved with PAD, has me working at the senior levels of the Anti-Defamation League. And as a social justice organization, we take great pride in fighting this kind of fight with you. Your voice is so, so important, and we at Phi Alpha Delta are so grateful to have you share it with us. You know, you speak truth to power. The issues of microaggressions, frankly, are, when you talk about crawl, walk, and run, they're out there. And sometimes it seems to me that subtle bias is worse than blatant discrimination. I wanted to ask you, as we're thanking you for this, what do you think we as an organization can do within our ranks to address this issue head on? I know that one of the things that I've been spending an awful lot of time both thinking about what the fraternity can do, but also what I can do as an individual, as a citizen, as an attorney, as a white person in a country which has had systematic racism built in for centuries. I'm doing a lot of reading. I'm doing an awful lot of listening, and I'm trying to ask the right questions. For folks that are interested, and I would welcome your thoughts, Brother Taylor, I'm reading this book over and over, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. It is a very difficult book for a white person to read, and it requires us to catch our breath and think about what we as a race have contributed to this, not necessarily as individuals, whether directly or indirectly, but I certainly welcome your thoughts, Brother Taylor, as to how we can advance this cause, because it's so important to us as people, as lawyers, excuse me, and as members of Phi Alpha Delta. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, brother. That's a great question. You know, when I thought about, you know, how I should present our pain, I cautioned against being too inflammatory or accusatory or blaming any group for what's happened in the past, because although maybe I have the right to, it does kind of, it causes people to get defensive and they stop listening. That's not right, but it happens. I also wanted to tell the stories in a way that, like I said, promotes empathy, because I think that does open us up to listening. And third thing I wanted to do was to speak truth, right? Like, we recognize that there is a problem in this country with police brutality against people of color. So I think, to answer your question, the first thing we have to do is to agree on what the problems are, right? In this organization or any other, you have to come together and come to a consensus on what the issues are. If there's no agreement on what the issues are, then there's no way you're going to solve the issues. And I tried to be very clear about what I thought the issues were and how to move forward. And so if that's happened in the organization, great. But you have to identify what the problems are. If there are problems within the organization, among African Americans or women or others being underrepresented, then you should have those discussions and talk about them and then figure out a plan to move forward. I don't know, for example, if that's true or not, but that is, to me, the first step. When I did our pain, I thought, as a chess player, you know, where would the attacks come? What am I leaving behind, so to speak? And I felt like, you know, it probably would come from people of color who thought I didn't go far enough. And I have gotten, you know, not criticism, but some from my woke white friends who said, you really did let white people off the hook a little bit. And I think, you know, if I have to go in one direction or the other, because again, you can't hit the bullseye. And if you gotta overshoot or undershoot, I'm always going to undershoot. I think that allows the conversation to take place.
I really appreciate that. On a lighter note, if it's any comfort, my children don't listen to me. Both my daughters went on to law school and became lawyers.
Oh,
I
good.
advised them against it, but what can I say?
You still did it. Good job.
Thank you
Congratulations.
very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Brother Corey Kobervig.
Corey Kobervig, Minnesota Statewide. Thank you, Brother Taylor. I think at this time we need to be a little inflammatory. Following up on what Brother Cliff said, I want to revisit the term bad apples, because I think that's a cop-out for institutional racism. The popular theory is if we just get rid of the bad cops, everything will be fine. But I don't think that's a real solution when people of color are arrested, charged, and convicted at much higher rates. We need to do more. It's essentially the way the system was set up and the way that it works. I think there are a couple issues with the way people become police officers. They're generally not highly educated. They're not required to do much training. Is there a point where the entire system needs to be reformed? And if so, what is our role as attorneys and people of privilege in that process?
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you said. It is certainly, systemic problems with the organization. And yeah, to say that there are a few bad apples, I think would be a disservice. I was saying we need to root out whoever the bad apples are, no matter how great they are. But you're right. I mean, what you even see is, this provides some cover oftentimes, is that you see even black officers who are disproportionately, charging and arresting, black people in communities. And it is the kind of weight of the police force and the pressure to comply with whatever their rules are and standards are. And I think that is a huge problem. I think the police in general certainly needs reform. I agree with you that oftentimes, folks that become police officers are not necessarily doing it for the right reasons. I've got friends, who are police officers who, if you saw some of the things they did in high school, you would think this is the very last person you ever would want to be a police officer. So I think certainly the system does need reform. How best to do it is probably too much for the next 2 minutes. So, but thank you for that comment.
Thank you, brother.
Are there other questions out there, or is there anyone who wanted to ask any additional follow-up? I had one that occurred to me when you were mentioning alien invasions, because I'm a fellow nerd as well, and the first thing that I thought of was Alan Moore's Watchmen, the plan to bring us all together by means of an alien invasion, and that didn't work out so well. It looks like Jay.
Well, I guess now I can put in a plug for my T-shirt, Our Pain.
There you go.
Call me up if you want one.
We had a question about a book that you may have been referencing earlier.
1984?
No, I think there was another. Was there another one?
I talked about Josh Waitzkin and Searching for Bobby Fischer. No?
Was that it, Sarah? That was it. This would be a plug for that.
It's great. I saw the movie, and I've watched. Josh Waitzkin. He doesn't play chess anymore, but he was one of these folks that were able to. A lot of chess, geniuses aren't really able to have coherent conversations outside the chessboard. He was one that was really able to do it, and talks about, life and chess together. And I've really enjoyed listening to his talks. And I think there's Garrett Kasparov also has a pretty good, life and chess book, if you guys want to check that out.
So, Sister Renee, I think you were up next.
Thank you. Renee Kimiko Hassman, Kennedy Chapter, Brooklyn Alumni Chapter, Assistant District Justice, District 29 Glam Chapter, trying to get back in the habit of that. I just wanted to say thank you. I think this was really enlightening, and I was, if I'm honest, afraid that it would be an overlap of the summit, where I know you shared a lot of stories, but you gave a lot of context to those stories and a lot of new information and insight. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
So, if there are no further questions and seeing none, Wendell, I just want to thank you again. This again was just a wonderful presentation, a wonderful discussion. I know everyone was buzzing about it and looking forward to it, and I think it was very much something that we all got a tremendous amount of. So thank you so much for sharing your stories with us today.
Thank you a lot, and thanks everyone for listening, my brothers and sisters out there. I really appreciate it.